welcome to everybody who's made it here tonight. We've had all kinds of technical problems, as you can see, and we've still got the problem of bringing everybody through the archaeology building, so it's all a bit stress level. Nevertheless, I hope it's all going to be worth it. We worked out before our Zoom conked out that one of the people here on Zoom tonight, Annie, has actually been listening to this talk for the past 40 years. But better older is better. This is one of Rag's real classics, and it was central part of Chris Knight's work in his thesis and in your book, Blood Relations. Can we show Blood Relations? Without losing the famous Blood Relations. And he's introducing us to Australian cosmology, Australian Aboriginal cosmology in a very broad way. But he's also locating the stories and rituals central to rainbow snake ideas, to linking it to the wider motif of the dragon in world mythology. But of course, it's special Australian characteristic, and what's so important is that Australia has been a continent of hunter-gatherers right up until the very recent, historically recent invasion by European colonialists. So this really gives us the opportunity of locating this very ancient motif of rainbow snake. We know how ancient it is from rock art, from undersea location narratives that go right under the sea, that were buried, flooded after the end of the last ice age. This is very ancient material, but we still have kind of ethnography and recordings, documentation of the meanings that this cosmology and this amazing creature holds in Aboriginal Australia. So I'm going to hand over to Chris, and you have to make sure you're talking to my phone there, which I hope is not.
Okay, right. So of all the images, all the motifs, myths and fairy tales, right around the world, I think you'd all agree with me that the image of the dragon is just the most universal. And I want you to just think about what a dragon is. I mean, clearly, as Camilla was saying, in different parts of the world, anthropologists and folklorists and different people may have given this creature somewhat different names, because, of course, in every part of the world, this creature has maybe slightly different aspects. So in some parts of the world, it might be called the great anaconda. Across much of Africa, it's the rain snake. In China, of course, we have this dragon, which is extremely positive. It's an image of vitality and power, and every Chinese emperor kind of embodies the dragon. So the dragon's very positive in that part of the world, Tibet, Korea, Japan, China. Over here in the West, of course, we have St. George and the dragon. And the dragon has to be slain by the saints, by St. George. So you have quite negative imagery of the dragon. The dragon is kind of evil. It has to have its head chopped off. You have to rescue a maiden from the dragon. As you move east, we get more positive. And in Aboriginal Australia, we actually have a number of myths which are recorded, but I've collected from other people doing the recording, where the dragon wins. I think I should be able to read you out a fairly short myth where the dragon wins a battle with a guy who wants a woman. And it turns out in this story that the rainbow snake is the protector of women. What's happening? Okay. The dragon.
The dragon has got wings. It's high up in the sky. It's a snake, a bird or a bat. So the dragon is clearly the highest and the lowest. That's a conflict. That's a contradiction. It lives in water. All rain snakes, rainbow snakes, dragons live in pools, in water. So it lives in water and it breathes fire. That fire is not cooking fire. It's kind of lightning. It's the kind of fire that thrusts things. So it lives in water, it breathes fire, two more opposites. And actually, if you just think of all the polarities, all the opposites out of which human experience is constructed, the highest and the lowest, water and fire, male and female, human and animal, all these different things, all these polarities, a dragon just combines them all. So a dragon is an animal creature, but have you noticed it has human, perhaps all too human, sexual appetites? This snake loves maidens. It falls in love with them, or it's already got a right to them, and for the world to be made safe for marriage and the family, as we all know from the story of St. George, you have to kill the dragon and rescue the maiden from its clutches. That's one version of human in the appetites of this animal creature. So it's animal and human. It's also male and female. It's hard to say what gender a dragon is. It's kind of masculine. It's very ferocious. It's a bit assertive, definitely powerful, but and some people have suggested it's a kind of penis, but if it's a penis, it's a rather strange one, isn't it? It's a coiling round, wiggly when it coils round. It does this coily, encircling wound. So, okay, so in this George and Dragon story, the George has to cut off the Hydra. You have all these different watery creatures, sometimes with different heads have to be cut off. And the trouble is those heads bleed. As you cut off the necks, they bleed. And if they bleed, what happens is that they regrow their heads. And the only way to stop that from happening is to use fire against the blood to cauterize the wound. And maybe you can sort of permanently kill the dragon. But it's very difficult to kill the dragon. And you can see from all the stories, it's never really killed. It's always around. It always comes back to life. So the highest and the lowest, and all those opposites all combined. And then, of course, it's cosmology. And actually, all the world's myths involve cyclical movements, the sun, the moon, the seasons, the tides. And now, when you think about that, you begin to think, okay, so a cyclical movement, like the course of the year, is itself a unity of opposites. I mean, the moon is full, up in the sky. It's dark. It seems to have come down to Earth. And you can argue that with seasonality, summer kills winter, winter kills summer, each pole kills the other, and there's a kind of constant alternation. So we have a kind of battle between summer and winter, between full moon and new, and of course a battle between all the different other opposites, between heaven and earth, the high and the low, the male and the female, the animal and the human, the wet and the dry, all these things, which of course, those of you who've been coming to some of these lectures before, alternations between polar opposite states, the raw and the cooked, from honey to ashes, all these different movements between opposite states, clearly indicating a cyclical logic generating these stories. So I'm going to just read you out a short story from Australia. And one of the things about the dragon in Australia, and just by the way, this is a rather strange thing where people who study Australian Aboriginal mythology, they will talk about the rainbow snake. And I find it really strange, this. I've never heard anyone, including tourists and people who speak for Aboriginal culture and make, tell you things about, I've never heard anyone describe the rainbow snake as an Australian version of this worldwide motif, the dragon. Apparently the rainbow snake is kind of the rainbow snake, and then elsewhere you have the dragon. It's absolutely clear that the Australian Aboriginal rainbow snake is a kind of a local, not all that local, it's a huge continent, of course, of Australia, but it's an Australian version of this universal thing, because the rainbow snake, just like other dragons, is the high, the low, male and female, all these opposites all combined in one. The brilliant thing about the Australian accounts is that in Australia, unlike anywhere else, we can find the story of the dragon where it should be, embedded in its ritual context. When we hear stories about the dragon, we don't understand, because in our culture, what's going on. We just have this weird creature, this dragon, sort of breathing fire. But in Aboriginal Australia, everyone kind of knows, or did know traditionally, about the dragon, because being inside the dragon was an experience. Every time you went through a ritual, particularly a girl's initiation ritual or a boy's initiation ritual, you were swallowed up by the dragon. You performed the story. You were in the dragon, and you go into the dragon to be initiated, and you die, and then you come out alive. So initiation rituals in Aboriginal Australia, mostly, at least in recent times, male initiation rituals, involved death and rebirth, entering the dragon, going into the womb of this creature, experiencing traumatic death. The boys that go through initiation are terrified. It's like they're dying. And then they come out reborn. So what I'm saying is that we're much more likely to really get adequate insight into what this dragon is by looking at Australia than anywhere else. Because, as I say, in Australia, we still have, or at least until very recently did have, and maybe to an extent, still have the ritual context. Just to explain, some people think of myths as kind of airs all sort of coming out of the head, and they're not really connected to anything going on in the real world, in the world of economics and production and kinship and all these real things that go on. You just have this sort of fantasy world of myth, and then we have real life. Well, originally, all the world's myths and fairy tales were rooted in real life. And the connection between fantasy and reality was ritual. You act out the fairy tales, you act out the myths. And of course, when we have our fairy tales like Jack and the Beanstalk, or whatever, Cinderella and all these things, somehow they're disconnected from reality because we've lost contact with the rituals which made them real. Ritual is critically important to these stories. And in fact, all of these myths that Levi-Strauss and others have documented, they can perhaps even be described as like, as you read the myth or tell the myth, you're reliving the experience of initiation. It's almost as if the structure of the myth is like a map of what happens when you undergo initiation. And don't forget, with hunters and gatherers, we were all once hunter-gatherers, you don't have weddings. Nobody gets married. You don't have a contract. No man has conjugal rights in his wife. What you do have is initiation. And the initiation rites bond you, but not to a man or a woman. They bond you to your own blood, your own kin. You have this loyalty to your blood. And until you've established that bond, you're not permitted to be like an adult and have, kind of quotes, legitimate sexual relationships. You have to be initiated first, just to make sure that this rather dangerous thing called sex, with all the problems and rivalries and conflicts which might occur in that relationship, they're not going to, because there's a sufficient sort of ground of rule-governed behavior, rule from below, I have to stress. It's not necessarily coming from above, but there's sufficient bonding to make sure that sex is kind of something which is manageable. Okay, so anyway, after that, here we have a story from Western Australia, Murrindata, that I want to just begin with. And it is reminiscent of myths from other parts of the world concerning a conflict between a winged snake or dragon and a male hero, I think of St. George, for the hand of a woman. Except that in this story, the dragon wins. And it's just so interesting to see what does it mean for the dragon to win. So we have the rainbow snake Kunmanga was in the water with a number of water women, or Murimbungo. So you have a snake in the water, and frolicking around in the water, protected by this creature, is the snake. So these girls are, they kind of perhaps think of mermaids. A mermaid is kind of a dual creature. She's a woman, but she's got breasts, she's got female in that body, but she's also a fish. And of course, the stories are homing in on the idea that women are periodic creatures. You move between one phase of the cycle and the other, one between the wet and the dry, if you like, between ovulation and menstruation in sort of Western medical language. But the mermaid idea is the idea every woman is half in the water, half in the phase of the wet. Okay, and here in this story, we have a whole bunch of girls, the Murimbungo, who are in the water, swimming around, and sort of, it's almost as if their fishtails are connecting up into this creature, this long protective creature. A man called Ngalmin, he came along and he tried to catch one of the girls. And at first the girls had been lying along the riverbank in the sunlight, but they saw Ngalmin coming and they ran and jumped into the water. So can you see what's happening? The Murimbungo girls are, they're a bit vulnerable now because they're on the bank in the sun. This man comes along wanting, I want a woman. He comes along and the women know what to do. You jump into the water and then you're safe because that's where the dragon is. That's where the snake is. Okay. The Galbin went away, disguised himself in mud, approached again, and succeeded in seizing a young woman. He went off with her, camping at various places, but always carefully avoiding any big war. So he's got a woman, he takes her from the wet into the dry. He carefully avoids all water holes because anywhere near water, and she's going to be seized back into the water and he's going to lose her. Keep her dry, keep her out of the wet, okay? The woman kept asking for water, but Ngalmin insisted on keeping to dry places. Eventually, she went off looking for water all on her own and found a billabong, a pool, where she drank. And when she drank, all the Murimbungo, the water lubras, rose up out of the billabong. They had long streaming hair, and they called out to her, "Oh, sister, sister, where have you been? We cried for you. Come back to us, sister." The water lubras reached out their arms to her. They pulled her down to them in the water. So she's been snatched away. She wants to get back. She succeeds when she's near the water. And she's pulled down by all her sisters into the water because that's where they feel safe and connected. And you can sort of see it's the connection between the women, which is the snake, which is the dragon. When Galbin discovered his loss, he cried. He cut his head and lost all interest in life. He returned to the billabong and tried to recover his wife, but she resisted, and the rainbow snake frightened him away. Again, he attempted life without her, but he could not stop pining and crying. He returned to the water for a final time. He saw his woman lying in the water, and he cut his head with a stone. He called out to the rainbow snake, "You have to give me your child. I cut myself. You see this blood belonging to me. You have to be sorry for me." He's bleeding. The rainbow snake just lay still, watching the Galbin. The girl did not move despite the man's pleas. At last, the Galbin jumped into the water to catch a fleeing woman. Hunmungo, the rainbow snake, lashed out from the water. He grabbed Galbin. He swung him from side to side, crushing him against the bank, and he drowned him. That's the end of the story. Now, what's delightful about that is that we have a reverse George and the Dragon myth. These women love being with their dragon. He's their protection. The dragon is the wet. The women feel safe in the wet. And what is so clear, I hope I'll be able to convince you, is that in these myths, women are always half at least wet, because women have a cycle. And part of the cycle, except when, of course, when you become pregnant, is you're menstruating. And it's that flow of blood. Notice the man in the story. He thinks, I'm going to try a bit of bleeding. I'm going to cut my head. But it's women's bleeding, which means they're kind of wet. But it also means they're powerful and can connect up. There's always a hint in all these stories, hint of the possibility of the world. Hugely controversial. Oh my God, you can't even mention this topic. The myths always come up with a possibility that when women menstruate, it's powerful. Because far from being isolated, you can synchronize your cycles with the moon. And when your cycles connect up, you are very, very, very powerful. So think about witchcraft. It's not physical power. You don't hit people with weapons, but this is kind of witchcraft. It's supernatural potency, and the potency of the blood is kind of contagious, and it spreads around. And men can be very illustrating that. So we have the idea that I'm suggesting that the dragon is high and low, male and female, wet and dry. And the reason why that's possible is because although men are relatively sort of non-periodic, kind of static, our bodies don't go through these phases, women's bodies do. And when women's bodies are powerfully connected with each other, they can be extremely powerful and synchronize. So now I mentioned the topic of ritual, and I kind of want today's lecture to connect up with last week's lecture. So I've talked about high and low, heaven and earth, all these things. Last week I talked about, and I know I'm so pleased, at least two of you, maybe perhaps a few more of you who are here today, who were also here last week. The first myth of Claude Lévi-Strauss's mythology is called The Bird Nester. It's a Bororo story. It's an Amazonian story. And rather like what I've just been discussing, this high and low and this alternation between the high and the low, the Bird Nester story is a story about going high, going low, and just perhaps the best way to think of it is to think of a sort of stage set. You have a rock, in some cases a tree, it's very, very high up. Then you have the ground. Then you have two men. And the men are opposites. Sometimes father and son, sometimes an older brother and a younger. And what happens in the story is that you have like heaven and earth. Up here is the land of the dead, here's the land of the living. One of the men in the first story, the Bird Nester, it's the father, is angry with his son because he's committed incest with his mother. He's raped his mother while she's out collecting palms to make a penis sheath for his initiation. So it's all, you can sort of see in the beginning of that story how initiation is really what the story is all about. So you have heaven and earth, and these two men moving up and down, and what's making them, what's setting them into conflict is an argument about a woman. So this man wants the woman, this man says you mustn't have her. So this son wants his mother, the husband is jealous. He sends his son up into the rock face, pulls away the tree that he'd climbed up on. And then we have, as I said rather great length last week, we have the fact that when you're in the other world, stranded in the other world, you're hungry. So we have the raw and the cooked, but when you're in the other world, there's no cooking. Everything's raw, and in fact, it's far from being able to eat while you're in the land of the dead. You yourself are raw, bloody food. And I was linking the story to Fee, Five, Fo, Fum, I Smell the Blood of an Englishman, the Jack and the Beanstalk, which is another story about going up and down between this world and the other. And Jack and the Beanstalk, as I read out last week, the young boys with his grandmother, they're bedfellows. There's certainly some hanky-panky going on between Jack and his mother, just as in the Bird Nester story. Sorry?
Jack, his grandmother.
Jack and his grandmother. Well, okay, there's two versions. One of them is mother, the other is his grandmother. Yeah, but I agree with you. There's more hanky-panky with the grandmother in the grandmother version than in the mother version. There's two versions. So incest seems to go with getting back into the womb, kind of your mother's, or it's some kind of maternal womb, and therefore kind of being dead, and certainly not eating anything. There's lots of blood around before coming alive again, coming out from that situation, coming out with enormous power. When Jack goes up into the beanstalk, he you know, he's fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. It's clearly, you know, he's raw food. But what he does, of course, is he steals these magical powers from the sky, the harp that plays itself, the goose that lays the golden eggs, the bag of money. In all these bird nest stories, they're kind of about, they're sort of patriarchal. They're about how a heroic young man braved the land of the dead, linked to a maternal womb, linked therefore to this terrifying liquid, womb blood, menstrual blood. He's brave enough to get into that world and steal the magic and come back to this world with that magic. And so even though in the story of the bird nester, he did something wrong, which is incest, this is the paradox that Lévi-Strauss discusses at some length. The paradox is that these stories aren't, they're not moral tales, you know, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. The paradox is that to have rainmaking power, you have to go back into your mother's womb. You have to, it's something like what Lévi-Strauss calls excessive intimacy between kin has to happen. There's no rainmaking power comes from marital sex. It comes from doing the opposite of marital sex. And there's this paradox, which is a kind of maternal incest. I think the better way to think of it is returning to the great mother, to the great womb, gives you magical power. Now, again, I want to, I don't know how much, yes,
Just go for it, Chris.
I go for it, I'm told to go for it.
Interrupted.
Okay, yeah, sorry, okay, right now, one of the things which it's just so important, I'll just repeat it again, is that ritual is the enactment of myths. Contrary to Claude Lévi-Strauss, who thought of ritual as like doing everything wrong, he thought that rituals do everything wrong because rituals mean that they show a figure, a hero who kind of does wrong things. He doesn't, you know, instead of introducing a taboo on incest, he actually engages in it. Instead of separating in a nice, clear fashion male from female, he's a cross-dresser, he wears a skirt. Instead of separating animal from human, you have the shaman wearing antlers or other animal. He has a sort of skin change. So what Lévi-Strauss argued that whereas the myths are trying to tell female, human, animal incest marriage, because that was his own theory, Lévi-Strauss's theory, when he came across all these rituals which seem to contradict his theory and mix everything up, instead of thinking that, okay, maybe my theory is wrong, his theory is wrong, he thought the rituals are wrong. And he described ritual as a bastard. He actually used that term. It's all mixing things up. Now, as I say, that's Lévi-Strauss's view. It's not the view of others. Terence Turner was another major anthropologist who knew his own versions from his own fieldwork, bird nest myths, and he had a very different view. And in fact, his view was that, perhaps I should read this out. You know, when, yes. You know, when I said that the bird nester, and I was doing this last week, the bird nester sent up a rock face to the nest of macaws. These are, don't forget, by the way, we're not in Australia, we're in Amazonia. Yeah, but I need to move to and fro because it's just so extraordinary how sort of the common structures of mythology just don't really care about oceans and continents and stuff. They just seem to be all over the place. I mean, of course, we need an explanation for that. But the bird nester is sent up to a macaw's nest to capture the nestlings. And what happened among the Pororo and these other tribes, they captured these little nestlings and drove them for their feathers, brilliant red feathers, which you need to have as a man when you're initiated. You wear these feathers, proving that you're a parrot or a macaw, and that means you're initiated. And everyone's seen pictures of these fantastic headdresses from, you know. So, and this is Terence Turner working with the Kayapo, and he talks about all the equipment they have for their ritual performances. Most of which he says are rites of passage of one sort or another. And he describes how the Kayapo adorn themselves with feathers for their headdresses, feather capes, bunches of feathers fastened to their elbows or necklaces, downy feathers stuck under the whole central area of the body. On their faces, they paint black jaguar dots, attending to jaguars. They use noise-making belts, anklets of tapir hooves, necklaces of jaguar claws. So in other words, as Turner points out, they make every effort to present themselves as animals. More specifically, they seek to present themselves as precisely the kinds of animals that populate the myths. And the myths, they don't have any old animals. They have predator and prey animals, the favorite animals to hunt, but also the most fearsome predators. You want to turn into one or other of those categories of animals. And nowhere is this more clear than when young boys go through the climactic rite of their initiation into adulthood. The boys' adult male guardians construct a circular leaf enclosure, a sort of giant macaw's nest in the center of the village plaza. The anthropologist Turner describes how they cover their bodies with macaw feathers stuck on with their own blood. They hang bunches of macaw wing and tail plumes from their arms and run around inside the nest all night, flapping their outstretched arms and crying rah, 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 in imitation of macaws. They become macaws, in short, to the best of their ability. They really want to be macaws, and they don't think of it as, oh, we symbolize macaws. We're a little bit like macaws. We resemble macaws. They've got to be, you've got to be initiated. You've got to be taken seriously, and you really are macaws. And the reason I'm stressing that a bit is to say that, can you see how the rituals in this case very accurately reflect the myths? They're not kind of, as Levy Side thinks, messing up the myths. Right, now, perhaps more widely, we don't quite know all the details of the Bororo male initiation rite, but another group in roughly the same area called the Barasana, and I'm going to read this out because, and then I'm going to get to Australia. We have the Barahana Hay House ritual. This is another version of a initiation ritual. Hay House, the word hay here, I'm probably not pronouncing it right. Hay means menstrual. So hay house means menstrual hut. And prominent, so, okay, it means a large communal dwelling in which men menstruate in a seasonal ritual designed to bring on their annual rains. You'll see what it means for men to menstruate in a moment. The rite of hay house is in essence a 3-day collective menstrual period undergone by men. So prominent in the rite are a variety of flutes or trumpets, in fact, large megaphones. These trumpets, which represent the great snake anaconda, a water snake, a river snake, a huge long snake, a kind of dragon quite clearly, they produce a terrifying noise like thunder. And this noise is made by the player blowing with pursed lips down an open tube, and is thus like, says the anthropologist, it's just like an amplified fart. An intrinsic feature of the trumpets is that they are open-ended. They are said to open up women at puberty, causing them to menstruate. If a child shall see the trumpets or other hay instruments, its anus would be opened up disastrously. It would suffer from violent diarrhea until it wasted away and died. Consistently with this, initiation, which involves contact with the trumpets, does open up boys. And those of you who were here last week remember how the bird nester, he has his behind eaten away by vultures. So he's very, very hungry because everything he eats passes straight through him because he hasn't an anus. And those of you who remember from last week, he remembers, oh, my grandmother told me what to do with that. When this happens, what you do is you make dough, you get some dough together, and you put on a nice behind, you stop yourself out, and then the food doesn't pass straight away through you. So a feature of the ritual is that the participants drink yage beer to give themselves diarrhea. It also makes them vomit. I'm wondering how much to go on. Shall I go on very? I mean, I better move on. I better.
Well, draw whatever you need.
The climax of the rite is the melting of beeswax in a sacred wax gourd. The wax has a specific association with menstrual blood, while the gourd container is like a womb containing children. The melting of the wax produces a symbolic menstrual flow, which brings on the annual rains. During the ritual, the novices and others are covered with red paint, identified with menstrual blood. Women are not to touch this paint, or they will immediately start to menstruate, their blood being this paint. Hay house is not only a metaphorical menstruation, it is also a symbolic act in which adult men give birth to initiates. In order to give birth, men must first be opened up and made to menstruate. The boy to be born and metaphorically swallowed by an immense snake and an anaconda. The boys are made dead by being coated with black paint, said to make the flesh rot. When the youths have been rotted, with this black paint, they are then sat down in a fetal position with the knees drawn up to their chests. That is, they are now fetuses inside the maternal womb. It's an extremely vulnerable condition, an exposed state which is compared to that of crabs and other animals that have shed their old shells or skins. And this is to be understood in the context of the belief that menstruation, like Hay House as a whole, is an internal changing of skin. Okay. So, I mean, I agree that all this is very strange. From a Western standpoint, a patriarchal standpoint, it's very, very strange. The problem is that the world's myths seem to focus around these themes, and what the men are saying is that we may have ritual power, we may have these sacred trumpets, we may monopolize ritual power today, but all the power that we have, we stole from women. And the reason women were in primordial times powerful, because they're the ones that make the babies, and they're the ones that follow the moon in menstruating each dark moon synchronously together. And so if men, and men say this again and again and again, you'll find it's all sort of shrouded in secrecy and kind of everyone feels so we better not talk about these things. But if men want ritual power, it's like men we've got the wrong bodies. So in order for men to seize ritual power from women, somehow we men, however painful and difficult it might be, we've got to steal women's secret by learning to menstruate somehow ourselves. And of course, it can be done. You can take a knife, you can initiate the boy, cut him, make him bleed from the nose, bleed from the ears, cut the penis, circumcise, bleed from there, all sorts of ways in which artificially boys can be made to menstruate during the course of their initiation. However, I need to get back to Australia. Like I said before, here in Australia, we find the most, I don't know, the fullest evidence of the connection between dragon, as I say, called rainbow snake, still a dragon, connection between all that and ritual power. Now, okay, I have mentioned this bird nest myth: heaven, earth, two men, one incestuous, one not, having an argument, a fight actually against each other, one trying to kill the other, going up and down, life, death, fighting over a woman. Okay? Right, long time ago, when was it now? 1978, I think it might have been. I thought, well, if Levi-Strauss is correct, that all the myths of North and South America are, in the final analysis, one myth only. They're all variations of a theme. They're all coming out of some common sort of engine producing the myths. Then why would you stop in the Americas? Why not, go across the Pacific and go anywhere else, maybe Australia? So you know what I did? I just got a little book, Aboriginal Mythology, by somebody called Robinson. I picked it up, and looked at it, and I opened it. And the very first page, just by chance, was, guess what? The bird nest. This is the Australian version, which I came across. And I think you'll be impressed at the stunning concordance between Jack and the Beanstalk, or Bird Nester, and this story. There were once two brothers, the eldest of whom, Nabonkit, had was out hunting when he found these two women. Not knowing that his brother had already claimed them, he returned home. Brother, he said, today I found two women in the bush. There's one for you and one for me. Nabonkit disagreed. No, he said, you are too young to have a woman. I could not let you have one. It's better that I have the two of them. Timuri pretended to concede. Soon, however, he thought of a ruse. Brother, he said, I have found an eagle's nest in a tree, and there are two young eagles in the nest. Come and I'll show you. They arrived at a low tree. Climb up, said Kimuri. It's not very high. But no sooner had the elder brother begun to climb than the tree began to grow. What's the matter with this tree? He called down. I'm a long way from the ground already. Why, called back Kimuri, you're not halfway up yet. It looks a long way down to you, but you're only a little way above me. Some time later, he heard his brother calling from a long way off that he'd still not climbed very far. Nabon Kit climbed and climbed until at last he reached the eagle's nest. When he looked down, he saw his brother on the ground, a long, long way down. Then he saw that just below him, a huge, smooth knot had grown all around the trunk of the tree. There was no way he could get down. He now realized that his brother had sung the tree. Sung is a lovely term. Of course, it comes from chant, singing. Enchant, you sing, you sing the tree. You sing, if you sing powerfully enough, the tree is going to grow the way you want it to grow. Also causing the huge knot to form around the trunk. Aye, aye, my brother, the victim heard Kimuri calling. You'll never get down out of that tree. There you will die. You wouldn't let me have one of your women. Now you can watch me take them both. I'm going a long way from here now. Bye-bye, my brother. Nabon Kit was stranded in the sky all through the rain time, all through the time that the grass came tall and green over the plains. He stayed there until the grass was brown and whitening. Then, in the time of the cold weather, a great wind bent and shook the tree and tossed out the dry bones of Nabon Kit into the grass far below. So he's starved to death. He's just a skeleton. He's dry bones. As the bones hit the grass, they sat up. For Nabon Kit was a great doctor. He began to crawl about, catching lizards, centipedes, and little birds, gradually putting flesh and sinews back onto his body. He set off in pursuit of Kimuri, eventually found him with his 2 wives, killed all 3 of them, and travelled on alone. So I hope you can sort of hear the message. This is a kind of Clint Eastwood character, isn't it? It's a kind of lone, cruel ranger. He's had his revenge. He kills, both women as well as his rival. And it's an element of sort of patriarchal individualism and dominance in the story, which comes out of a situation where there's been this enormous conflict going on. So I want to now, I know I haven't got too much longer.
How much do you haven't talked about how much?
Right, okay.
Go for it.
Right.
We're about time.
Okay, I mentioned the sort of assumption in the stories, and it's just everywhere, that female menstruation is connected with the moon. I mean, you won't find it's obviously often called a superstition, but it is true that the human female menstrual cycle is, on average, 29.5 days, quite different from chimpanzees who have 36-day cycle, bonobos have 40 cycle. I mean, it's just a fact. You can see why menstruation is linked with the moon. And there are various other reasons to think there might have been adaptive advantage for evolving humans to actually do things differently at full moon from dark moon. Full moon, you're safe from the lions in Africa. At dark moon, you're not safe because the lions like to eat you. They've got good night vision. And I won't go into too much of that, except to say there's this assumption. So could you please let me invite you to imagine a landscape right across Australia where women are synchronizing their cycles with the moon, and where menstruation means, on the one hand, connectedness through the blood, and on the other hand, taboo. So when you're menstruating, the moon's dark, you're connected with other women, you may be adding a lot of blood, ochre, cosmetics, because red ochre is hugely symbolic and important across Australia. The critical point being that when you are in that mode, that ritual mode, you're certainly not with your husband. No husband, no man should see a woman when she's in that condition. She's in seclusion, she's in another space, she's as far away from marriage as heaven is from earth, as death is from life. So the myths picture it as when you're in seclusion with each other, collective seclusion, collective synchrony, you're kind of in a world of the dead, but it's like the moon's death. It's a temporary death from which you return. Okay, so can you just imagine the whole of Australia You're going this way, that way, this way, that way. Now everyone's connected through the blood. All wives have become sisters. All men have become brothers. There's no marital sex going on. And then you reach full moon, all the taboos are lifted, and now all the sisters turn into wives. All the brothers turn into husbands, and then that lasts for 2 weeks, and then you get to new moon again, and it flips. So you got this. Can you see what I'm saying? It's just right across the landscape. This way, this way, this way, this way. And in terms of kinship, I was trying to stress earlier on, you know, the dragon is these opposites, high and low, water and fire, all these opposites. In terms of kinship, the polar opposites are kinship versus marriage. You can either be linked to people through the blood, or you're intimate with strangers, people who are not your blood, kinship and marriage. And what I'm suggesting is that the myths are describing an initial situation where you move between kinship and marriage, as if between this world and the other, on a monthly basis. Kinship, marriage, kinship, marriage. So all women, it's like all women who are sisters, skin change to become wives. Or you could even say all women are sisters, they die as sisters and come alive as wives, as if the wife in you has killed the sister in you, but then the sister in you is going to kill the wife in you because you're going to change roles according to the phase of the moon. So I have the battle between sister and wife. It's not exactly a battle, it's just a cyclical movement. So, okay, imagine that across Australia. And now imagine a missionary or a white man, an anthropologist, arriving to talk to some Aboriginal people and asking, what is the power that you celebrate? Could you describe it to me? I'm a missionary, I'm an anthropologist. How big is it? How big is this thing? And the Aboriginal, oh, how do I explain how big it is? It's just like, it's right across the continent, because the moon doesn't care about little patches of ground. The moon just goes right across that whole continent. How big is it? Well, very, 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 you know, it's just as big as you can imagine. That's that big. It hasn't got any boundaries, this thing. What color is it? Oh, dear. Oh, it's kind of red. It's satisfied. Yeah. What shape is it? Well, it's cyclical, it's round. But of course, a marvelous metaphor is, it's like a rainbow. Very, very, very big. And they notice the red band in the rainbow. And have you think about a rainbow? What does it do? It does move between the sun and the rain. The rainbow is made of raindrops, which is the wet, in which is sunlight. The sunbeams inside the rain produce, of course, the colors of the rainbow. So you've got this thing. How big is it? Very, very big. What shape? Well, it's cyclical. Where is it? It's between heaven and earth. All these things between, you know, rainy season and dry season. And then in terms of like humans, what kind of human might you compare it with? And the Aborigines are quite clear about it. They say, well, it's like our mother, but they call it the all mother. It's like all our mothers. It's that big. It's like a huge collective mother. We've all come from that mother, and all of us come from that, if you like, creature, which is, again, like a snake. Why is it like a snake? Many reasons. Partly because the snake changes its skin in this way, moving between opposites, sort of dying, shedding one skin and coming alive again with a new skin. Partly because there's something about a snake which is egalitarian, isn't there? You know, a kangaroo's got a head, and then a neck, and then a body, and then a tail, and then feet. It's like, you know, vertical. The snake is like a chain. Every part of the snake is equal to every other part. It's like connected. So that again makes it a very good metaphor. But the other thing about the snake, of course, is that it swallows, because it takes flesh into itself. And actually, the snakes that the Aborigines relate their great monstrous being to, they consume by swallowing and then regurgitating, and then they might swallow the victim again. So this movement inside and outside, this massive kind of womb, again, makes an enormous amount of sense. Right, I've mentioned a few things. What I haven't done is talk about the most sort of important thing, but I can't do everything all at once. It's just that probably the world's most famous myth, the myth that's been studied most, I collected about 40 different versions of it, It's called The Story of the Two Wawilak Sisters. And I'll be really, really quick. There's a short version and there's a long version. And the short version is once upon a time, or in the dream time, there were two women and they were walking across the landscape, going towards the water. And one day, next to a pool, they sat down, looked at each other, looked into each other's eyes, spread their legs apart, and both menstruated. And their flows joined up. And they used the flow as a loop and looped it round their head. And in this way, they were swallowed by a snake. That's the story. And then there's a long, long, long version. I won't tell you the long version, but it's essentially the same. There were two women, one pregnant, one not, one with a baby, one pregnant. They were walking along the landscape. They'd had sex with their brother, their young brother. That's why they were pregnant. It's really, really, really wrong to do that, but that's what they did. Make them really, really powerful, because I should say marital sex never gets you anywhere. So it certainly doesn't get you any magical power. And then they came to they named everything. They named the landscape. These were like goddesses, powerful goddesses. And wherever they stopped, they would bleed, and the blood would mark a distinction between one territorial boundary and another, and one local language and another. And so they named the places as they went along. So these are the creatures that gave us names, that gave us the distinction between one territory and another, one language and another. They separated the sky from the earth, the wet from the dry, and then they arrived at a pool, inside which dwelt Yurlunga, the great rainbow snake. And they weren't aware of what was happening, but they didn't quite know there was a snake in here. But one of the sisters had her baby, was carrying her baby. The other one was walking over the water, over the edge of the water, when her menstrual blood fell into the pool, and the blood seeped down. And at the bottom of the well, Yulunga was saying, "Ooh, where does this blood come from?" And the snake really likes blood, and it was aroused by it, and it came out of the pool. It created a huge black cloud. The whole sky was just beautifully blue, a lovely blue sunny sky, but right over these two sisters was this black cloud. And the sisters realized something very, very powerful was about to happen. And they started to try to do a rain dance, or rather a dance to stop the rain from falling. But it actually made the rain come on harder and harder and harder. And then the rains poured down, there's great lightning and great thunder of lightning, and the snake welled up. And then you get the sort of Noah's Ark and the flood. You get a huge, huge flood, and the snake rises out and swallows the women. And then the water subsides, and the snakes regurgitates the women, and then they get swallowed again 3 times. And men today have their rituals during which they reenact all the wrong things, the things which were wrong to do, which the women did, and in being wrong, created or conjured up the snake. And then you have this paradox, which is that men tell the women to be swallowed by a snake is a terribly frightening thing, you shouldn't do it. But what do the men do in their rituals? They do everything possible to repeat the actions of the two Wawilak sisters in order to get themselves swallowed by the snake. And when you ask Aboriginal people, what are the men, the initiated men, what does it feel like to be inside the snake? They say, well, it's like being safe. It's like being at home. It's like being with your kin. You're comfortable, reassured, safe at home. Being in the snake is like that. And then, of course, that takes us back to that earlier myth I mentioned, where the women where the woman has been chased by a man who wants to seize a wife for himself, and the girls escape him, going into the water to be safe inside the snake. So can you see what's happening? When the men take over these rituals and menstruate, they depict the most powerful experience you can possibly have, being one in this womb, sharing your blood. The men depict that to the women as a disaster. Can you see what they're doing? Those men are making women frightened of something. What are the men making the women frightened of? their own power. The men are saying to women, be afraid. Your power is terrible. Be careful not to unleash that power. It's our power. We're going to do it. And the men actually, you might think, how do the men make babies? Well, they take the babies from the women, dunk them in a big hole in the ground. The boys are swallowed by the rainbow snake, and the boys are then given back to the women, this time reborn. All the world's religions, patriarchal religions, they all sort of put women down by saying, yes, you women, you produce flesh, but for a boy to have a soul, you have to be twice born. All these patriarchal religions say that. So men claim to be doing better themselves, what women do, and it's just all, I don't know, it's like a turning of the world upside down. The men are establishing patriarchy by engendering in women fear of their own power and to produce babies. Men say, right, leave it to us. The men also say, yeah, but not really. This is all, it's all very sad. We don't, they're kind of aware that they took a wrong turning, that in real life, all their huge efforts to produce babies, it's all a kind of a pretense. It's not the real thing. Women are needed to do the real thing. Okay. That's it.
Well done, fantastic. Right, yeah, don't go away.
Okay.
Have a sit down if you need.
Okay.
Oh God, where am I? Come on here. So, yeah, I hope, yeah, you went everywhere with that. It was virtuosic, Ellie, but there must be some questions. I'm sure there are people who are completely sold on this whole idea. Anybody got questions, comments in the room here? A mention on Zoom of the American great versions, quite subcultural, Ohio serpent mounts, manyhood, feather serpent, lots of analogues to rainbow snake in the Americas, of course, anacondas and rainbow serpents in Amazon as well. Any questions in the room here? Right, we've got lots. Okay, I'm going to go from that corner there and then there. So yeah, you.
Yeah, very good question. Yeah.
Can you repeat?
So the question is, how can anyone be sure what a story like this means? I mean, because obviously people come from different backgrounds and different cultures and so on. So, yeah, actually, that's why Claude Lévi-Strauss said, as he was working on myths, he said, I'm not interested in meaning. I'm interested in structure. I'm going to be studying these myths as if I'm studying crystals. What does water do when it freezes? It forms a certain crystal. What does, copper sulfate? What does, what does carbon do when it's a diamond? You have different kind of crystalline, or at least mathematical structures. So I think Lévi-Strauss was onto something. In a way, I mean, let me just say, let me just take an example, because one of the stories I like decoding from the West, from our culture, from over here, I say our culture, Europe, is the Sleeping Beauty. And I know that you can interpret the story of the Sleeping Beauty more or less like this. If you're a man and you want to get ahead and find a wife, find success in life, you need to get on a horse, take your sword, cut through hedges, and seize your woman. If you're a woman, what you need to do is lie on your back for 100 years and wait to be kissed. And that, okay, I can see the point there. I can see that is one way of looking at the story of the Sleeping Beauty. My answer to that is that, yeah, if you look at the Sleeping Beauty and just interpret it that way, you've still got lots of questions. Why have we got 12 golden plates and 13 moons. Why have you got, I don't know, the spindle? I mean, there's so the hedge of thorns, all those details, they're not explained by just that, you know, just saying it's patriarchal ideology. So my answer to you would be, yeah, best follow Levi-Strauss's example. What is structurally underneath the stories? I mean, if Levi-Strauss says all the stories are one myth only, and they are this story about this world, the other world, life, death, moving between the two. So if I was to say to you, right, I think the ultimate structure of all the world's magical myths and fairy tales, if you wanted to boil it down to the simplest idea, it's this. We're in this world, the world of the living, where normal things happen, where you can see where you're going, where people are eating, where people are having sex, all sorts of normal things produce this stuff. And then there's a flow of blood, and it triggers a movement into the other world, the world of the dead. And there's nothing magic about that. We were alive, now we're all dead, or the hero is dead, he's gone into the land of the dead. And then comes the magic bit. We come back from the dead. Okay, that's the magic bit. Now, in all the world's myths, that idea of dying and coming alive again is linked with the moon. And I'll just say to you, I would be hesitant to say a particular myth means something, because of course you're right, it wouldn't mean whatever it means to you. Emotionally, you read it coming from your background, what does it mean? And I have to say, most of these myths to Europeans, they don't mean anything. They really are just nonsense. These myths are just absurdity piled upon absurdity. I'm suggesting that if you look at it through the lens I'm giving you, which is partly the lens Levi-Strauss has, but I've done a sort of tweak on it, more or less turned it upside down. The brilliant thing about this is that suddenly you see extraordinary intelligence in these stories. You think, oh, wow, yeah, God, no wonder, sure, God. It all sort of makes sense. And you don't have a headache. Instead of going from one myth to another myth to another, you think, oh, what's this detail, that detail? I'm getting a headache. I can't. Suddenly you feel an underlying logic, a thread connecting all the stories up, and it's satisfying. And I just think it's better. It's better than just having a headache.
There's also the aspect of the connections to ritual and initiation,
Yes, of course, yes.
which are, I mean, they're always going to be very local and particular, but they will also have an aspect of this.
You can't have an initiation without
worlds.
dying and coming alive again. That's what it's all about. And girls' initiations are you die when you menstruate, but it's a temporary death. It's a joy actually to die and come alive again. You feel refreshed and reborn, according to the myths and rituals. No one's doubting that there are all sorts of painful and difficult things about having periods and everything.
At the back is you, and then one in front, and then I'll ask Sim.
So you mentioned in some of these stories that there's a lot of paradoxes. And I guess my kind of question is that from the Western point of view, you kind of expect maybe our myths to have a bit of a moralistic, do this, don't do that. But in a lot of these stories, you have people committing transgressions, even within their local framework, transgressions such as incest, or using their blood power, and yet they seem to be rewarded.
Yeah.
They gain this power for it. And
absolutely.
So I'm curious, why would people tell these stories where people who commit transgressions are rewarded? Like, how can I remove that from my view where it's almost like you're incentivizing that kind of behavior?
Okay, so that to Zoom.
Okay, so the question is a very good one. How can it be that myths, far from kind of teaching young people who listen to the myths or other people listening to the myths what to do and what not to do, they seem to get everything wrong. They seem to be telling the listeners to the stories, if you do wrong things, transgressive things, like, for example, incest, you'll be very successful in life. It just seems all wrong. So, okay, I do have an answer. I'm arguing that what men describe as incest is nothing of the sort. Levi-Strauss gets there to an extent. He says, the term incest in our culture, I don't know, it's used by social workers. It means, abuse, sexual abuse, fathers with daughters, brothers with sisters. The myths are not about that. Although men claim that that's what women get up to with their sons. So in the bird nest myth, what's happening is the men are demanding or justifying, we men need to initiate young boys. If you leave it to women, they won't know how to handle their sons, and they're going to get raped. The boys will be out of control. This boy will end up raping his own mother. And I'm arguing it's an accusation. It's an ideological accusation at women's expense. And to think it's kind of, I mean, obviously the concept of true, untrue is a little bit difficult. But I'm still saying men are accusing women who get close to each other and each other's babies. What they're doing is they're describing that as excessive intimacy within the blood. So Levi-Strauss says don't think of the term incest as sexual abuse. Think of it as excessive intimacy between kin. Now, into that category would come women going into a menstrual cup together, being intimate with each other's blood, with each other's babies. That would be patriarchs might accuse women of, transgression. Now, you won't be new to the idea that women, that under patriarchal religions, anything women do, which they do from freedom of sexual choice, will be demonized by the patriarchs. They'll accuse women of all kinds of transgressions, even when women are simply exercising freedom of choice in their relationships, either with each other or with men. The patriarchy is very good at turning things upside down and accusing women who want to have some autonomy of transgression. And then the men invent certain rules, which are their rules. So I suppose I'm saying that. What I'm saying is that what's described as transgression in the stories is there for a reason, because men are trying to dissuade women from getting together with each other and with their babies. They're saying if women do that, you know what's going to happen? They're going to get raped by their own sons. Do you know what's going to happen? It's going to be incest. Whereas in reality, actually, by the way, the incest taboo was established by women. It was not, as all the anthropologists say, established by men. The idea that patriarchy established the incest taboo, in Darwinian terms, it doesn't make any sense. That's another whole topic, of course.
Yeah,
But,
but Chris, also, in the initiation rituals, particularly the jungle wool, the kuna pipi that belong to the Wawilak stories, men are going through mimicking the story, performing the transgressions of the story,
of course, that's right,
to gain power. So the sources of power are where these supposed transgressions lie. But when it's men doing it, it's not transgressive. It's what brings the power and solidarity.
Yes, if women do it, it's wrong. When men do it, it's not just right, but supremely, religiously, sacredly right. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Was another question in the room? That somebody had a hand? No? I'll assume then. There's a couple of questions here. Emil, did you want to ask a question? Can you talk? And also Mark Homeshaw. Are you there? Emil, yeah.
Hi there.
Oh, that,
Am I audible?
yeah. Yes.
Great. Great talk. Thank you, Chris, as usual. I was wondering, regarding the motif of the dragon, given that it is a very specific expression of an animal that doesn't exist, why does it keep it's popping up all over the world over and over again, from South America to Europe to China? You keep having variations of the same mythological animal. So does it have a common ancestry, so to speak, a common mythological ancestry from Africa, or where does it come from? I'm not entirely sure about that. In addition, why the difference between dragon and snake, if there's any difference at all? That's it.
Well, that's a wonderful question. Possibly the best answer to that is to read Camilla's piece in Human Origins, Approaches from Social Anthropology, where she talks about a source cosmology. It's like, where do all these myths come from? I mean, obviously we've been working together in our team, but the answer I would simply give is that we evolved in Africa, and there are reasons why the social structures we established initially were periodic. Why you didn't simply have a thing called, like, for example, often people say hunter-gatherers when we first emerged, when we first evolved. So people sometimes say they were egalitarian, as if somehow we became egalitarians, and then okay, we've got egalitarianism, we've got something maybe like some call it communism, primitive communism, but actually that's not true. Early human societies, and we know that from extant hunter-gatherers, had a pulse, a periodicity, and what happens? I mean, Mona Finnegan has discussed this, of course, as well, and she's going to be speaking here later this term. Women take the power in the ritual. They make their point, prove that women are strong in a laughing, playful, joyful, assertive, raucous, sexually provocative way. Then women begin to think, well, okay, we've made our point. The holding on to power is not going to be very exciting. In order to be able to organize our women's rebellion again, we need to let go, yield, allow the men to have their say, strut around doing their ritual, and then just to make, almost like Mona says, almost like provoking the men to strut about in ways which could be threatening to women, so that women are right. We better answer. So you have a periodicity: women rule, men rule, women rule, men rule. Anyway, I mean, all right, we can argue about the details of that, but the basic point that I will insist on is that the reason why all the myths have so much in common, why they all seem to be coming from the same source, isn't because the human brain is a digital computer, which is what Lévi-Strauss was arguing. It's because when we first established language, culture, religion, kinship, we did so in connection with the changing seasons, the tides, the moon, and the menstrual cycle. And there's a certain combination of those elements, those cyclic elements, which was optimal, which worked, which produced meat and food and babies, collective childcare, and other ways of doing things which wouldn't have been optimal, wouldn't have worked. So it's a way of life which is echoed and reflected in these stories. And at the beginning, when we first evolved now, there would probably just been a few thousand of us with this particular way of life. And because that's the way of life which proved successful and enabled us to spread across the planet, that's the way of life kind of still echoed and reflected in the stories.
Okay, another question in the room. Go for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's a connection or an explanation from these dragon and snake myths, the image of the snake eating its own tail.
Ouroboros.
Yeah, the Ouroboros.
And how we might understand that for some of the.
Well, what could be more cyclical than a snake eating its own tail? I mean, it's going round and round and round. I mean, if you wanted an animal image into which people can turn, so all these stories, we turn into animals to make a point, by the way, to make a point that for the moment we're going to be distant, we're not having sex, we turn into different kinds of animals. In the initiation rituals, they're always connected with animals. The eland bull dance, you know, the jaguar in Amazonia. But and there's the reasons why the snake is so popular, because as I said before, the snake does these particular things. It's, you know, it's very often, by the way, because the scales of the snake shine like a rainbow, shimmer like a rainbow, and it changes its skin and it swallows and regurgitates. But a snake which bites its own tail, wow, that's a beautiful image of cyclicity.
Links up. There's several on Zoom mentions, particularly Middle Eastern mythology, the seven-headed dragon in Revelation, defeated by angels, as it attempts to devour a child born to a woman with the moon under her feet. Okay. Thanks, Mark, for that one. And then there's Andy Wilson talking about the unruly power of women in the Aboriginal story of power of chaos in Leviathan, Tiamat, and so on in Near Eastern creation myths. Yahweh or Marduk or Baal has to be lured by defeating this power. Yes, absolutely. Eloise, do you want to ask the question about Aboriginal hunter-gatherer stories seem to have more patriarchal outcomes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it would be just that I feel that like the missed outcomes differs from the egalitarian hunter-gatherers that we myth that we've seen before, just because I feel the outcome is has a
Okay.
has a more patriarchal.
I've heard anthropologists, good anthropologists, friends of mine, sort of say that originally we humans were egalitarian, and then we developed cattle herding and farming, and as a result of that, we became, because farmers accumulate, crops, cattle herders accumulate cattle. It means that certain people can acquire a whole lot of property, and that leads eventually to huge levels of inequality and patriarchy. The trouble with that argument is that in Australia, there's sort of, you can argue that a kind of sort of farming might have been going on. They built fish weirs and certainly tended areas to make sure that there was enough grass for kangaroos to graze on. But essentially, Australian Aborigines were hunter-gatherers. In some ways, perhaps kind of complex hunter-gatherers. But the point about it is that across Australia, we have a very significant variation in degrees of gender equality and gender inequality. So up in northeast Arnhem Land, Western Arnhem Land in particular, there was a very significant degree of female sexual power, sexual autonomy. Any blood shed during rituals was going to be menstrual blood. There was no sign whatever of men shedding, ritually produced menstrual blood. But in Western Australia, in the Central Desert, in areas where there was much less rich resources away from the coast, quite extreme levels of very complex male dominance. So yes, I've been to Eloise. In Australia, male dominance was pretty extreme in many regions. Okay, I mean, just as an example, I'm arguing that in order for men to dominate over women whom they regard as powerful thanks to their menstruation, men have to menstruate. Whatever huge areas, in my book is a map of it. What men did to boys as they were being initiated, the boys would be, the sun would go down, it would be getting dark, there'd be woo, 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 woo sound coming from some hollow. That's the snake, that's the rainbow snake, hungry for blood, hungry for these boys. The women are terrified, the boys are even more terrified, they're pissing themselves. The men race in, seize a few boys. So if we don't feed the snake, it's going to take the whole camp. The boys go are taken. I'll try to do this quite quickly. What happens during their initiation is the boys suffer the experience of death in a way. They're laid on their back on a table formed by the flesh of kneeling men, and an operator takes the penis of the boy, takes a sharp stone, sticks it into the base of the urethral canal, rips it right through the penis, which opens up wide with a huge flow of blood. That's called sub-incision. Most of the area of Australia, initiated men were sub-incised, and the men would say, we do these things the way women did. We need to menstruate. I mean, it's explicit. You can read my book and all sorts of quotes. I'm not making it up. There's no question that's what the men are doing. So sub-incision is a brilliant way of men menstruating. Other ways aren't so convincing. I mean, in northeast Ireland, the men just cut their arm. Now, the men do say this is menstruation. We stole this trick from them, but you can see, I think, can't you, that to bleed from your penis is a bit more convincing if you're trying to menstruate. And this is a price of patriarchy. I mean, men do pay a price for ruling. It's a very heavy price, of course. It's not.
I mean, it is specifically often termed gerontocracy. It is a means of older men, in particular, controlling the labour and controlling the marriages of younger men, which does not occur with African hunter-gatherers to anything like the same degree, if at all.
There used to be debates in anthropology, but did we evolve the way, like, did the early human society resemble Australian Aboriginal society, or did it resemble more African hunter-gatherer society? Well, the fact is we evolved in Africa. in Africa, even to this day, you've got very large game animals like elephant and giraffe and zebra and stuff. And there's a reason why relative abundance of meats for men to hunt meant you could hunt on a regular basis, once a month, in synchrony with the moon, taking advantage of the light of the moon, keeping safe when the moon's dark, keeping safe from the lions, and therefore having a rhythm or a periodicity which empowered women, because women also have this, you know, same periodicity. So instead of a society where your periodicity is in conflict with the way, you know, politics is organized, imagine a society where your menstrual cycles are like the clock which makes the world go round, where the rest of the society resonates to the same rhythms. And that you'll find that in Africa to an extent. I mean, more in Africa than probably anywhere else in the world, in parts of Africa.
Have we got, I'll take any more burning question in the room and then any more on Zoom, but I think we better wind up soon because people might want to. Okay. Have you? Ooh.
I want you to say that. Can you come up here and say?
Describe.
We've got somebody here
who's
who's just
blood of a cobra.
who's
I don't know, like sometimes they sell it as shots, like sexual, like stamina or something. Almost like a magnum tonic, you know.
a magnum tonic.
Or did you mean for sexual stamina? It's meant to be.
Yeah, that's not why I went to like the witch doctor.
Right.
I don't know, my Indonesian friend just took me there and then you cut the head of the snake.
We have somebody here who, for whatever reason, met a witch doctor who chopped the head of a snake, and in the room we have somebody who drank snake's blood. I'm not sure what that did to you. Did that do it for your virility by any chance?
No, it made me pretty hot and dizzy.
Made it very hot and dizzy.
Fevered, dizzy.
Okay, I
wow.
mean, and of course the symbol for health on all the ambulances and medications.
It's health,
like,
yeah.
You know, there's a reason for that.
Darsha, I'll take Darsha. Would you like to
Darsha,
say be the last help us
Okay.
wrap up here? That would be great.
We have the yeah.
Yes,
We have
hello.
the famous
Hello.
Darsha herself.
Oh.
Sort of some wonderful books on similar topics.
Oh, thank you, thank you. And thanks so much again, Chris. I always love listening to your stories and all your interpretation. It's wonderful. My thought was, you'd mentioned that patriarchal idea of incest is too much intimacy, right? Now I'm thinking, I've been trying to puzzle how we got to the point we are at. And I think because of that fear of intimacy between mother and child, boys, need a lot more intimacy and of the evolved nest to develop well, and they get less of it in patriarchal society, which leaves them stuck in the pre-human systems they're born with. They don't grow all the egalitarian sociality that we has to grow after birth. It's postnatal from experience. So anyway, so we're in this vicious cycle, it seems to me, where we're growing undercared for boys who turn into immature and insecure men. And then they keep the cycle going. What do you think?
No, wonderful, Dacia. I mean, Dacia Naves is the author of so many lovely books on what she calls the evolved nest, the kind of childhood infant environment which makes us healthy humans. And it's all about certainty, assured intimacy, not just with your mother, but with other carers and each other, and how patriarchy was always scared of that kind of intimacy. And it's just the damaging effects it has on people as adults if you haven't had that kind of solid childhood basis of an experience of love, but tangible love, tactile intimacy of love. So thank you very much. Absolutely, totally agree with you. Yeah,
very relevant.
Very relevant
contribution.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm mindful of time because you're literally a captive audience. You can't get out the door. So I want to be able to release everybody as a big group out of the door if possible, and that people aren't wandering elsewhere in the building. And just to say thank you very much for coming tonight. We'd better thank Chris again, because that was obviously very, thank Chris again. We will be getting Chris coming back with Helena Tuzinska to work on another fairy tale, a Slovak fairy tale, which also has bird nest themes. So the next couple of lectures are going to be from two lecturers who've done a lot of work with the Bayaka hunter-gatherers. Next week, Jerome Lewis, who's had many years of field work with the Bayaka in the Congo. And he's going to be talking about Bayaka gender relations. So it's a real contrast with the picture we've had of Aboriginal Australian, potentially quite patriarchal.
What's the title?
The title is Women's Biggest Husband is the Moon. So that is a quote from Bayaka informant talking about women and their cycles and the linkage to the moon. And the week after that, we have Denise Salali. So these are two very excellent talks on the Bayaka. So I hope you'll be coming back again to hear more and make your way through the archaeology building. Thank you very much for getting here. And thank you very much to everybody on Zoom for joining us and for your contributions. And we hope we'll be seeing you again next week. Thank you very much. Bye, Dasha. Thank you, Leoncia and Manchego, for sorting out the Zoom for us.
Thanks,
Hopefully
guys.
we'll
Well
behave
done.
better next week.
It was brilliant.
Bye,
Thank
good
you.
night.
Bye.
Thanks, Leoncia. Thank you. Bye then. I'm saying goodbye to you.